Hello, welcome to my presentation on information disorder. My name is Karen Nauman, APR. I am a senior instructor at DINFOS. I have the honor of teaching in the Joint Intermediate and Joint Contingency courses taught at PACS. Some of the concepts I want to talk about with you today are information warfare, a little bit about information operations, information-related capabilities, but mostly information disorder, social media monitoring tools and resources. Mark Twain, when he was right, he was right. Information warfare is hardly a new endeavor. Military scholars trace the modern use of information as a tool in guerrilla warfare to the 5th century BC Chinese military strategists. And I'm sure you've all read the book, The Art of War. It emphasized accurate intelligence for decision superiority over a mightier foe. These ancient strategists helped to lay the foundation for information warfare strategy in modern times. Taking place below the level of armed conflict, information warfare is the range of military and government operations to protect and exploit the information environment. And although information is recognized as an element of national power, information warfare is a relatively poorly understood concept in the United States, with several other terms being used to describe the same or similar sets of activity. Information warfare is a strategy for using information to pursue a competitive advantage, including offensive and defensive efforts. A form of political warfare, information warfare, is a means through which nations achieve strategic objectives and advance foreign policy goals. Defensive efforts include information assurance, information security, while offensive efforts include information operations. Similar terms sometimes used to characterize information warfare include active measures, hybrid warfare, gray zone warfare. These and more are defined in a Congressional Research Service report, and I put a snippet of the cover of that report. I highly encourage you to read this report. It offers a conceptual framework for understanding information warfare as a strategy. It discusses past and present information warfare related organizations within the United States government, and it uses several case studies as examples of information warfare strategy in practice. Countries discussed are the usual suspects: Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and the Islamic State is also discussed.
Disinformation, election interference, cyber attacks. These are gray zone tactics that the United States and others have struggled to counter. Massive data breaches like the hack of 22 million records from the Office of Personnel Management have been tied to state-supported organizations and individuals. Also increasing are state-sponsored attacks against private companies, like North Korea's cyber attack on Sony. As more physical infrastructure is connected to the internet, digital vulnerabilities will continue to grow. Authoritarian states are using information technology to control their own citizens and to influence events beyond their shores.
The Chinese are using the combination of surveillance techniques, prisons, concentration camps, and artificial intelligence to gather data on everybody. And in China, you use your Huawei phone to buy everything. Nobody uses cash or credit cards. And so they have everything on you. China's data is not accessible to Google or European companies. All of ours is accessible to China. So it's not just about debt traps, it's about IT, AI, control of societies and big data. And that's a real threat, and it's happening quickly.
Russia's use of disinformation particularly stands out.
I think there's no question that the Russians today have taken multiple pages out of their Cold War playbook. During the Cold War, it was primarily newspapers, radio, television to some degree, and other forums like that. Today, obviously a huge increase in the internet, social media, multiple international television stations like RT and Sputnik.
With fake social media accounts, bots, and trolls to reach millions of Americans.
We in the United States were not prepared for Russia to attempt a very bold and an audacious attempt to shape and influence the outcome of U.S. presidential election. How do we fight for the integrity of the American mind and help the American people understand that the battle space is public opinion?
Gray zone adversaries take advantage of our own insecurities and divisions to undermine democracy and sow doubt.
The advantage the Russians had, which they didn't really have in the Cold War, was they've got a very divided United States. We're polarized along not just Republican and Democratic lines, but also on key issues.
Find the divisions and exploit them. Create chaos, create debate, create obfuscation, and then you can pursue your agenda while people are busy fighting with each other.
That is one of several videos that the Center for Strategic and International Studies has put out on gray zone warfare. I highly encourage you to view some of the others. Now, who has seen this? The Joint Concept for Integrated Campaigning. This joint concept, similar to doctrine, we root a lot of our teaching at DINFOS in this. In it, and many of you probably already know this, it talks about the joint force must be ready to counter or defeat the efforts of hostile actors seeking to undermine our interests without triggering an overt conflict, aka gray zone warfare. The JCIC reconceptualized the operating environment from that binary perspective of war and peace to a competition continuum, types of information warfare that are mentioned in that congressional service report I mentioned earlier, to armed conflict. So the joint concept for integrated campaigning posits that for the foreseeable future, adversaries will continue to creatively combine conventional and non-conventional methods to achieve their objectives. Many will operate below a threshold that invokes a direct military response from the United States. They don't want to trigger a military response from the best military in the world, but they do want to retain the capability of escalating to more conventional armed conflict if they desired. This concept also states that any solution to the military challenge must account for emerging patterns of competitions below the threshold of armed combat, among other factors that we're going to talk about. So, in other words, it aims to institutionalize the mindset and the approach required to prevail in the future security environment. That's likely to be significantly different than that experienced over the past several decades, or the history of war for that matter. Additionally, I love this document. It acknowledges that agile action is required to counter aggressive challengers operating below the threshold of armed conflict. So, for the strategic communicators out there and public affairs officers, you have to be able to operate at the speed of relevancy. We also, not only do we teach from concepts and doctrine, we also pull in knowledge from other areas, academia, business, thought leaders, other countries, think tanks. And this conceptualization of information disorder comes from a lot of work that was being done in academia and in Europe, and think tanks here in the United States. I'm going to give you a minute to process and read this slide of definitions of misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation, which are often conflated and people don't really understand the difference. Okay, so let's take this apart a little bit. I think what's so brilliant about this is that the intent is key to what the definition of the term is. So for misinformation, there often isn't an intent. The disseminators believed it to be true. You know, it could be an inaccurate news story that will be corrected. A caption's wrong, a date's wrong, translation's wrong. Disinformation does intend to shape beliefs, narratives, and counteract truth. An example, generally intentionally created conspiracy theories or rumors. Specifically, examples include spreading falsehoods during the 2016 US presidential election. Malinformation is based on reality. It's used to inflict harm on a person, organization, or country. So what do I mean by that? Like a picture taken out of context, maybe that of a dead child, and the intent is to ignite hatred between two particular ethnic groups as a result of this picture being taken out of context. That would be malinformation. So let's look at the elements of information disorder. Again, this is from a Council on Europe report, and Claire Wardell, PhD, is works and writes and advocates for the United States' think tank, the Shorenstein Center. So, in trying to understand any example of information disorder, it is important to consider it in three elements. The elements are agent, message or context, and interpreters. So in this graphic you see, they also have questions that you can explore for each element. So let's unpack that a little bit. An agent, who are the agents that created, produced, and distributed the information disorder? What was their motivation? So when analyzing this element, I would encourage you to consider some of the following. Agents can work on behalf of a state or as part of a loose network of passionate supporters, or a country, a party, a cause. The target of the disinformation can be an individual, a cause, a party, a religion, or a country, etc. Now, agents aren't necessarily human. They can be programmed bots or some combination of human and bots. Agents may intend to mislead and cause harm, or they may not. Motivations can range from financial motivations, political motivations, social motivations, psychological motivations. Okay, let's go down to that second tier, message or content. Messages or content can be communicated beyond social media, by the way. I know this is a social media forum, but information disorder has been around for as long as humans have been around. That could be in gossip, in speeches, it could be in pamphlets, it could be on images somewhere. So just keep that in mind as well. But let's go back to thinking about everything in social media context. When exploring this element, ask yourself, what type of message was it? What format did it take? Like a news, a meme, a video? What were the characteristics? And finally, that third tier, interpreter. When analyzing this element, consider when the message or content was received by someone, how did they interpret the content or message? And what action, if any, did they take? Finally, messages or content are interpreted in a whole host of ways. Think about it. How you interpret content depends on the source, who created it, who shared it, and how it syncs with your existing beliefs. What the interpreter can do with the content or message highlights how three elements of information disorder should be considered parts of a potential never-ending cycle. In an era of social media, where everyone is a potential publisher, the interpreter can become the next agent, deciding how to share and frame the content for their own networks. And I'd like to walk through a real-life example soon. But first, let me dive a little deeper into this before getting into the example. So there's the need to consider the three different phases to which I alluded. They are creation, production, distribution of information disorder. The agent who creates a fabricated message or content might be different from the agent who produces that message or content, who also might be different from the one that makes it go viral. We must also understand the different types of messages or content being distributed by agents so that we can start estimating the scale of each and addressing them. Finally, we need to examine how mis, dis, and malinformation are being consumed, interpreted, and acted upon. Or are they being reshared as the original agent intended? Are they being reshared with a different message, an oppositional message attached? And are these rumors just continuing to travel online and just like expanding throughout people's various information spheres of information influence? Okay, to pull all of those concepts together that we discussed and examine the phases of creation, production, and distribution to help us understand information disorder, let us take this real world example. It's kind of a well-known example at this point of an article that appeared online. Pope Francis shocks the world, endorses Donald Trump for president, releases statement, and it was published on a self-proclaimed fantasy news site WTOE5 in July 2016. For an in-depth analysis of this article and the network of sites that were connected to it, I recommend you read The True Story Behind the Biggest Fake News Hit of the Election from BuzzFeed. Yes, BuzzFeed. Anyway, WTOE5news.com was barely 2 weeks old when it published the hoax story. Pope Francis shocks the world, endorses Donald Trump for president, releases statement. In this article, it quoted the Pope as saying that the FBI's inability to prosecute Hillary Clinton for her emails led him to endorse Trump. The story also falsely declared that news outlets around the world were reporting the endorsement. To date, the hoax has registered over 100,000 comments, shares, and reactions on Facebook, according to data from BuzzSumo. But the hoax did even better on Facebook when in late September, the website Ending the Fed, which is an extreme right-wing based conspiracy theory website, posted it. That post earned close to 1 million Facebook engagements and was the single biggest fake news hit of the election, according to the analysis by BuzzFeed News. So Ending the Fed's copycat hoax has gone on to capture additional attention as concerns about fake news during the election intensified. So the hoax has been pointed to again and again. WTOE5 News is no longer online, and its owner has never been identified. A BuzzFeed News investigation has found that the site is part of one of the world's most unique and ambitious fake news operations, a network of at least 43 websites that together have published more than 750 fake news articles. So let's walk through this analysis. The agent, ask yourself, what type of actor, an official nation state actor, a terrorist group, or an unofficial? In this case, it was unofficial. Then you ask yourself the level of organization. You know, it had a loose connection to a group of conspiracy fake news sites. So a loose network, but there's tight networks, there's independent, there's no level of organization whatsoever. What was the motivation? You may be tempted to think that the motivation was political, but the original actor had a financial motivation. It was a clickbait site. What was the level of automation? Human, bot, something. It looks like there was no automation. It was posted on the site and then it was picked up by a conspiracy website and then it went on from there. Was there an intent to harm? Well, it seems like the original actor didn't really care, didn't really intend to harm. It was just had a financial motivation. However, the later agents that distributed this information disorder, I mean, their intent was to harm political rivals. So let's take that third tier, if you'll remember, message and content, and let's kind of walk through it and analyze it from that perspective. What was the format? Well, it was a text news article on a website that was later disseminated via social media as article with photo. What was the duration of the message? Well, if you want to think about it, what would be the shelf life, of an article like this? Well, until the election, I would imagine. So it had a matter of 4 months until the election. So it was intended to stay in the information environment that long. What was the accuracy? Was it misleading, manipulated, fabricated? It was totally fabricated. The Pope endorsed no one. Who do you think the content or message targeted? Well, the first time it targeted people that would just click on that website. Eventually, when it was posted on the conspiracy theory right-wing extreme website, then it was targeting Hillary Clinton, supporters of Hillary Clinton, and or perhaps undecided voters in the United States at that time. Okay, looking at that third tier, interpreters. How was the message interpreted by different people? Well, you have no way of knowing unless you've read the article or studied this. So I'm going to tell you because I did read up on it. Trump supporters interpreted one way and Clinton supporters interpreted another way. As strategic communicators, you should ask how your stakeholders are going to interpret it. Was the message reproduced? Yes, it was. Ask yourself, was the interpretation negotiated, oppositional, hegemonic? Well, it depends on which audience you're talking about, the interpretation. So I hope that helps bring this elements of information disorder together and how to analyze it. And we still wanted to help the students at DINFOS operationalize this more and think about it in connection to their military activities. So what we created ourselves, honestly, is just several steps for them to consider. Step one, we say they should identify and state the information disorder problem in 1 or 3 sentences as concisely as you can. And this would apply whether you're in the military or you're not in the military. If you're reporting to a commander or an ambassador or a CEO, concisely state the problem. For our military communicators, we said, give some thought to how this relates to the overall mission. How does it affect the commander's desired state, as well as as a communicator, your desired state for that particular mission. Step 2 takes what we just talked about and really do that analysis on the level of agent. Identify what's known in those terms. We talked about this, the type of agent, level of organization, their motivation, their automation level, their intent to harm that you can surmise. You may not get the answer to all of this, but the more you can get, the better, obviously. What do you know about the message and content? And interpreters, who is interpreting it and what actions that they're taking. Specific to professional communicators, you should have your active and aware stakeholders or publics identified already. So I tune in to how they are interpreting the information disorder, or they reproducing the information themselves and spreading it. So we talked about getting as much information. You might need to rely on others' expertise, IRCs, joint staff, depending on where your shop is, to get involved, see what they can contribute, or you inform them and form a working group, get some expertise around this. Strategic communication implications. if you decided or saw that this is affecting a goal of the mission of your communication strategy, yeah, then you might need to put some strategic communications around it. If it is, then maybe you're seeing that your active stakeholders or your aware stakeholders are really interacting with this information disorder, then maybe you need to create a goal or line of effort around information disorder, and then set some measurable objectives to that. That's another conversation. That's a communication strategy conversation. But I think you all know how to do this. This source, by the way, I put the sources in all of these slides. Great source, Weapons of Mass Distraction. It's a good read. I do try to leave you with some very practical strategies in addition to this way of analyzing the social media. What can you do about it, or what tools or resources are out there for you? So I just want to remind everyone that you can't be the superhero of the entire information environment. You need to focus on desired states and your stakeholders as it relates to these strategies. So just remember your boundaries and what's relevant to you and your organization. And you might have used some of these strategies. These are well-known responses to information disorder. Inoculation theory. Inoculation is a theory that explains how attitudes and beliefs can be made more resistant to future challenges. And this is something you can do preemptively before information disorder occurs. So take your top stakeholders or publics, a recognition that they have a held attitude or belief that's vulnerable to change, that may not be favorable to you. Expose them to and or engage them in preemptive attacks that may occur in an information disorder way, and then give them the potential counter arguments. You need to warn your public that they may be exposed to this information disorder and it's going to challenge their beliefs, but you're going to weaken it by refuting it ahead of time, and then they're on guard for it. You can also report, there's report to Snopes, there's platforms now have reporting, PolitiFacts, FactCheck, in addition to labeling it yourself false. And by the way, there was a recent study that came out. I won't say who I think it's from off the top of my head, but it showed that don't just put false or fake or untrue. Put things like mostly false, partly true, something to that effect that shows that you carefully looked at it, and you can say exactly what part are factual and what isn't. Did you know, according to NATO Stratcom, by the way, there are more than 110 initiatives around the world conducting fact-checking, debunking, and content verification? So if you catalog the misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation, then you can also report to one of these organizations, some of which specialize in particular things like Russian disinformation, or there's some that specialize in information disorder targeting Africa, or health issues such as the recent pandemic of COVID. Also, consider think tanks and universities such as Pew Research Center, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, Annenberg Public Policy Center at the University of Pennsylvania, University of Washington Center for Informed Public, and the disinformation itself, malinformation, whatever the information disorder is, it may be news itself. So outlets such as the Washington Post and Reuters, they have dedicated resources for reporting on information disorder. Also, fun fact, I'm sure all of you know this, Google, which owns YouTube, has a partnership with the International Fact-Checking Network, which is run by the Poynter Institute, better known for running PolitiFacts. They have media training programs for different age groups that you can adapt for a media literacy program, which includes video campaigns that you can run, or you can partner with another organization and create media literacy programs. So speaking of media literacy and critical thinking programs, consider implementing this strategy with a third-party institution. This strategy helps the public discern whether information is reliable or not. It focuses less on the actual content to more than how people think about the content they're seeing. Therefore, are offering an approach that can be applied in many different contexts, not for one specific messaging maybe you are inoculating them for. You combine this with a reporting strategy, and your publics will do the reporting on the platforms for you. Present corrective information. If you are going to present corrective information, do it tactfully in a well-supported manner that avoids disparaging those with opposing views. You know, often they don't know that they're spreading information disorder. It truly is misinformation for them. And any of these strategies really can be done in a gamification way or cartoon style video. And none of these strategies probably just be done alone. I would have some combination of these in place. Some more resources for you to explore. RAND Corporation has an amazing website on truth decay, and then they have whole more pages dedicated to fighting disinformation. Bellingcat has tons of resources and how-tos. Bellingcat is a whole subculture, by the way, and I think there's a podcast out there too of people that are trying to flag dis, and malinformation out there. It's great. There's Counter Disinfo. First Draft News has a website with all different projects they work on, but they have a great e-newsletter I encourage you to subscribe to. Disinfo Cloud has a bunch of tools. I think they just have to have you sign up and confirm your email address. And Valencia College has an interactive media bias chart that helps you understand which media are center and which are more going towards the various extremes. So I'm sorry that we're not doing this in person, but these are the big concepts that we talked about today. Information warfare, again, please read that Congressional Research Service. Information operations, work with the other IRCs and other resources that you have at your disposal. Information disorder, I hope you're thinking about that differently or more deeply than you did before. And these social media monitoring tools and resources are helpful to you. Again, thank you. By the way, I am recording this in the spring of 2021, and you're going to be watching this in the fall of 2021. So who knows what has changed between now and then. I do post a lot of things on my LinkedIn feed about the latest and greatest in research and case studies and tools and resources on my LinkedIn profile, my feed. I hope that you do connect to me though, and we can keep in touch and keep this conversation going. So thank you very much.